Welcome to another Executive Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg. Today we are speaking with Stuart Payne, Chief Executive of the North Sea Transition Authority, NSTA. Stuart also co-chairs the industry's North Sea Transition Forum and is a member of the Scottish Government's Energy Transition Leadership Group. NTSA is a private company owned by the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, and is responsible for maximizing the economic recovery of oil from the North Sea. Prior to Stuart's current position, he was the director responsible for NSTA's activities in decommissioning, supply chain, and the HR function. Stuart is also chairman of the Brightside Trust, a national children's mentoring charity, and a member of the advisory board of Barnardo's Scotland, the UK's largest children's charity. Stuart, it is always great fun for me to have you on campus. Thank you for coming back year after year. We sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you, it's good to be here.
Can you share a little bit about what your role is and what the organization is that you're driving?
Sure. So I work for the North Sea Transition Authority. So we are the UK's regulator for the offshore energy sector. So our job is to make sure that we have sufficient energy as much as we can to provide energy security for the UK, to make that energy supply as clean as possible by reducing emissions, and play our part in accelerating the transition, particularly by driving forward carbon capture and storage and hydrogen.
All right. Can you say all that again for me in something that I might understand?
We're part of the government in the UK, and our job is to make sure that what the UK can do is have sufficient energy to meet our needs today, whether that's moving things, heating things, and powering things, that we've got that in the future, and that we do the least damage to the environment in the process.
Sounds like basically you're just trying to make sure that the future is safe for all of humanity somehow. So what have been some of the first and early challenges that you've had while taking on this responsibility?
I think some of the initial challenges that I've faced and the organization has faced is we live in a pretty polarized political space. So if you work in the energy sector anywhere in the world, and the US is no different, there are very strong voices to move more rapidly away from fossil fuels. There are very significant challenges in doing that. We have an energy transition that's going to happen over time and not overnight. But helping to convince people of that and helping people to see that real progress is being made, whilst you're still able to meet the needs of society, to make lights work, cars work, plastics, materials, medicines, and all of those things, and to be able to look at how you secure jobs. And so our challenge, probably the biggest challenge early on, has been how far can we move and how fast, getting that balance right so that you keep bringing people with you.
So how do you get the, because your background is in private industry for this, so how do you get that balance right of the public good long-term where people may not even be able to appreciate what's in their best interest, and of course the private sector and organizations that for right reasons need to be actually earning some income?
Sounds corny, but you try to look for the overlaps. So if there are spaces where corporations can make money, shareholders can get returns, that you can deliver energy security and you can lower emissions, that's your sweet spot. And those things are relatively rare where they all coexist, but they're not impossible. So for example, one of the things that we do is to try and make sure we can attract capital into investing in things like carbon capture and into developing new sources of hydrogen. If you can do that, those are going to be valuable industries for the future. Those industries are going to employ people, that's good for society in the UK and any country you're in, and they'll be delivering clean energy. What you've got to be able to do is you've got to make sure that you can articulate the value proposition for all the different audiences. You've got to be able to talk to the different audiences, and that can range from kids in high school through to pensioners with investments and pension funds and worried about where their money's going. I think one of the biggest risks for all of us who are involved in this space is leaving communities behind. Either because you patronize people, you are condescending and ignore them and think that their views don't matter, think they won't understand the challenges. They may not understand the geoscience, but most of us don't. But they can still be involved in the conversation. Why is it relevant to me? And one of the reasons for that is because ultimately consumers will pay for energy at some point, and consumers drive demand. And the challenge around the energy transition isn't one of supply, it's of demand. And unless we can all help manage our demand differently, people upstream can do as much as they like. But whilst there's a huge demand for the plastics, the products, the oils, that remains a real challenge.
All right, so this leads me to wanting to ask you a lot, but one of them, which is probably seems far afield, is your background was in HR. The being able to communicate with a bunch of different audiences and recognize the importance, did you hone that in the HR field? It seems to me that that's a skill that would also be useful for our HR professionals.
I'll do it in the abstract. Yes, I think it's absolutely a skill. If you not only if you're able to communicate to different audiences, but if you want to. If there's a drive in you that says, I'm not going to take the quickest path, I'm going to try and make sure I bring as many people as I can, and that's a reflex. I think that reflex is really important in good HR roles, and it's important in my current job.
You seem to do that very well. At least the stories you tell me, they sound like they're working really well.
Well, there you go. So if I've got you, then I'm halfway there. That's right.
So what is it that's helped you really develop that skill?
I think if I look at the roles that I've done, if you're involved in recruitment, you're telling stories. Now, those stories have to have some features. They have to be authentic, otherwise you lose. They have to be compelling. You won't believe this from my answers, but they've got to be succinct. And they've got to have an ability to meet the audience where she is or where he is. So, for example, if it's a data desiring audience, if it's an audience that wants technical data, you have to be able to scratch that itch. If it's an audience that wants to be given a vision of something, you have to be able to do that too. If I think about labor relations and industrial relations, you have to be able to understand the narrative of an entirely separate group and work out how your kind of corporate narrative can match a union's narrative and find a sweet spot where there's an alignment. So you have to listen first and then find how your stories can match together. And then if I think about sort of broader HR leadership roles, if you're a leader in any part of a business, your job is to tell stories to your employees about why what they do matters. And not just why what they as an individual do, why what they do as an individual matters, but how it plays a part in the bigger picture. So throughout the life cycle of HR jobs that I've done, recruitment, talent, the broader generalist stuff, industrial relations things, storytelling, but authentic storytelling, not making stuff up, has been something that I've had to learn to do. And I've been lucky to have some really good teachers and coaches in that space.
So you've been wildly successful, I think, from any objective measure, and you're still absurdly young, it turns out. So is there, besides this ability to really capture and condense information and then share it, and you're calling it storytelling, are there other things that have really helped you rise so well and so quickly?
So I'm not going to let you get away with absurdities of that. I've been really fortunate to do some really interesting and cool jobs. Really lucky. There's three things in anything. So there's the abilities that you're born with. Well, that's a free pass. You don't get to pick those. There's the luck and opportunities that come along or you don't miss by one day, and you don't control that. All you can control is the effort. So I like to think that I have made the best of what I've got. And I'm never going to be the brightest. I'm never going to be the most able, but I've done worked as hard as I can. Biggest single thing has been surrounding yourself with people cleverer than you are. And in almost every job I've done, particularly when I took on responsibility for leading things, surrounding yourself with two groups of people. People who are brilliant at what they do, including being smarter than you are, and that not being a threat. The second you get over that, you're free. And secondly, having people who aren't impressed by you. So having a team around you that don't find you, I want to try and make them laugh. They don't find me amusing, but they do want me to succeed. And that's really, really powerful, because then what you've got is a group that will hold the mirror up and tell you when you're wrong, which I am half the time, but will also do it in a way that still lets me try and succeed in the objectives we've got. So cleverer people and honest people who want you to win, but don't fawn over you and think that you're any cleverer than you are.
So two aspects of that. The first one being the latter you were talking about. How do you foster that environment where people really want to help you succeed, especially if they think they can do your job better than you?
Yeah, so everybody in a job like mine now should be looking at their team and outside people and saying, if I won the lottery tomorrow, who could come and replace me? You have a responsibility to do that in your organization, to bring talent through. And if you can do that, that's I think a good part of being a leader. If you make it about yourself, you're a dictator, and dictators fail historically. If you make it about a collective organization that says we are going to achieve some stuff and you get to be part of it, I think you bring people along with you on the ride. I don't find it hard in my current organization having enough work to do. My team don't find it hard having enough work to do. So we have all got enough on, and my job isn't to hold them back or stop them exploring what they want to develop and all those kind of good things. My job is to try and give them the space to do what they need to do to develop their own capabilities. And maybe one of those people at some point wants to take my role. I would hope they do. I think that's healthy.
And the earlier part of that previous answer was about not being intimidated or concerned about having people that were smarter than you, I think is how you put it. How do you get to that level of comfort that you can, because many people would be threatened by that?
I was never the smartest kid. It's really easy. And for a leading academic, that will be hard. I was never the smartest kid. So I would sit next to the smartest kid. He was called Dominic, as it happens. I would sit next to Dominic and he would be the smart. So leveraging smart kids is something that I grew up doing. And one of the things I've been really lucky with is I've had a HR career so far that allowed me to be in a businessy role doing HR rather than the other way around. So I've been helping to lead organizations, and my ticket to the table was that I did some HR stuff. That meant I, by definition, wasn't a geologist. I wasn't a petroleum engineer. I wasn't an economist. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't an expert communications guy. And so there was no shame in saying to those experts, tell me a bit more about what you do. Curiosity was rewarded. Curiosity was encouraged. And I just choose to not let that go. I also like the idea of saying to the experts that I have in my organization now, their expertise is what you see externally. It doesn't get translated and filtered through me, because I would dumb it down by definition. Right now, we're in the middle of licensing carbon storage for the first time at scale. We have the world's largest carbon storage licensing round. We have genuinely some of the world's best geoscientists. We have no right to have those people. We're a relatively small organization in a remote rock in Northern Europe. We have genuinely some of the world's MVPs. If I was to then try and get in the way of that and be the face of that stuff, that would be a stupid move. So the fact that there are so many things that we do that are beyond my comprehension tells me what's my job. Well, my job is to give them the space and resource to deliver and be brilliant. That's great. Why wouldn't you want that?
So is that what you think of as leadership, or is there more to it that you'd add?
I think that's a part of it. I think the other part is tone setting. And I think that sounds really pretentious, and that sounds really, or risks sounding really pretentious. But it is tone setting. It's what does it look like to be in here? So if you're in an organization, what does it feel like when I walk in? What's okay, what's not okay? How am I treated? How's everybody in the building spoken to? How does that feel? We in a very ununique way, we call that the great place to work. And that really matters to me. I'm proud of that, and I built it in my previous role, and I'm very much the sponsor of it now. And that looks at things like our values as an organization. That looks at how we tackle inclusion. That looks at, for me personally, and I talk about this to my team a lot, and it's an odd word to use, but I like it. Talk about being kind. We can, get a lot of success and make a lot of good things happen by being a bit more kind with our time, how we speak to people, how we act, why we do things. And for me, a big part of leadership is making that environment obvious for people, accessible for people, and crucially, challengeable for people. So it's okay for someone to say, well, I heard you say that a few weeks ago on this video with this handsome academic guy, and yet when I was in that meeting, this happened. How do you square that? And I hope we have an environment where people would call you on it, which goes back to not worrying about impressing people, having an environment where people can come and see you and say, I don't think that was as good as we could be. Does that make sense?
Yes, and how do you create that environment?
Say it a lot. So talk about the values and kindness a lot. I'll give you a practical example. There were news stories in the UK a few months ago about high-profile harassment issues, and particularly unpleasant ones. And it occurred to me that I'm the chief exec of an organization, and that would never happen in my organization. And then I had a bit of a smile at how stupid that is. and realized that every well-intentioned head of every organization that has ever suffered from that problem will have sat and thought that would never happen here. So we had a meeting with all of our staff, and I said, I need you to know I'm worried about this issue. Very specifically, because everyone who is complacent about this, it's a bit like safety. Everyone who's complacent is at risk. And so we talked about why it would be a problem for me. As the leader of this organization, I talked about what would never be acceptable and made it clear that it would always be the right thing to do to flag it up and come and talk to us. It's a very specific example, but sometimes you have to, I think, not leave things inferred. And bad behavior, and we'll have bad behavior, law of mathematics, at some point, it hates the light. And so if you're going to have people who don't live up to the values of the organization, make life as difficult for them as possible. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part is how you show up. And that's exactly the same as HR. One of the things I've always tried to advise people working for me in HR is you are always on. And it's not fair, because you can be quite junior, but tough. Because you get to be there at the very worst days of people's careers and lives sometimes. And that's a privileged position. The dude in finance doesn't get that. So when there are injuries, fatalities, when there are bereavements, when there's job losses, when really difficult moments in people's life, you get to make that a little bit less awful. And that's a position of privilege. The price for that is you can't be the person at the office party making inappropriate jokes. You can't be bullish and unpleasant in the office. Because if you are, and then you do my speech about it's always okay to come talk to us, they're going to say, well, wasn't that the guy? Oh yeah, I heard the joke you made. It doesn't work. And so you're always on. And leadership's the same. So a big part of how you create the environment is what you choose to do. How do you walk around the place? What do you look like? Are you approachable? Are you accessible? Do you listen?
And is that how you also create that environment where, because it's one thing to be all of that, and that, of course, sounds like best practice. How do you also get people to be willing to come into your office and say, what you said this morning wasn't quite exactly how we're doing things, or should be doing things?
What I've done, and it isn't by any stretch perfect, and I'm beginning, but what I've done is there's been a number of occasions where, my EA, one of my closest colleagues, has come into the office several times and has, to use a colloquialism, torn me a new one around how I'm behaving. And it's usually because I'm being a control freak. And it will be that I've interfered with stuff. It will be that I've done stuff I said I wouldn't do and I would let other people to do. And she has come in and told me in no uncertain terms. And then a few days later, we've been in a meeting where she's been there, and I have told everyone what she just said to me. And she's still here, I'm still here, and it's all good. You have to tell people that those things happened, and two outcomes need to be there. Firstly, I need to be a little bit less bad. So I need to improve the behavior. And secondly, that has to have been a good thing for her to do, because it takes courage to do those things. But I'm not important. What's important is the 50, 60, 70, 80 line managers who people will interact with every single day. They need to feel free to do this, which means that you have to be free to make mistakes. What do I do if one of my employees comes to me and says, that thing went wrong, or I didn't like how you did that? If I, as a department head, have then messed up, am I now in trouble? No. So you have to make it okay for people to have grown-up conversations. You can't do that by just telling line managers to behave differently. You have to also give them an environment where they can foster creativity, but they can also foster making mistakes.
So that sounds great, but a lot of people then get worried about where is that line between a mistake that it's a learning opportunity versus a mistake that, that's really too much of a mistake. Or is there such a thing?
There is, and we're a statutory body. So we're a regulatory body. We can sanction companies. We can fine them £1 million fines. So we have real legislative powers from legislation. We grant licenses that can have a value to a company of billions of dollars. These are extraordinarily serious things to do. So you can't be cavalier. So there's a difference between making a mistake and being cavalier. So yes, there are some mistakes that we would struggle sometimes to come back from as an organization and an individual. They are pretty few and far between. I draw the distinction between people who make mistakes, own them, and then fix it, and people who make mistakes, don't care about it. That's a big world for me. It's a big difference for me. And I think, again, the more frightened your workforce is of making a mistake, the more likely they are going to make one. The simplest example is I spent, as you said at the beginning, I've worked in industry the majority of my career. And in the energy industry, where safety is the biggest single issue any day at any point, any company with a good safety culture is one where people are encouraged to report problems, concerns. They're encouraged to do that as early as possible. They don't then go and fire the guy who runs the thing. They help the guy who runs the thing. And then what you're looking for is, what's that guy's reaction? If that guy is prickly about it, that's a difficult conversation. If that guy says, I had no idea, or says, yeah, but you realize when you told me I couldn't have those resources, that's what led to this. Okay, that's a good conversation. So I'm much more interested in owning a mistake and fixing it than the mistake itself. But it's important to say, as a government body, that doesn't mean we're flippant or cavalier with the decisions we make. And we're really careful. We do those things really thoughtfully.
So you've shared what you think leadership is. How do you develop that in others?
Some of it's in people. It's just in them. And you have to pick cool people. So I'm really fortunate. We have some really cool people. So pick the right ones is a good starting point. I think there are some basic skills that, programs like the ones USC offer, you can educate people on some techniques and some things to think about. But I also think about treating it like an athlete. You have to keep practicing. You have to work on the muscles and you have to get some support. So I'm a massive fan of coaching. Coaching for me is not remedial class or therapy, it's physio. So if you have an athlete, she will go and see a physiotherapist in between sessions and meets to keep the muscles from tearing. It's not because they have torn. Good coaching is to help people keep those things sharp. So I think a lot of leadership is part of the makeup of the individual. And then I think you have a responsibility to be clear about what the rules of the game are. So what's the culture that you want to be? And you can't just expect people to know it. So you have to talk about it often and regularly and consistently. You have to role model and be consistent. And then I think there is a piece around making sure that you have an available resource of mentors, an available resource of people that they can look to and get support from, which is harder in a small organization than it is in a big organization. But conversely, I'd argue is more important in a small organization.
So part of your world is predicting and trying to positively affect the future, really for society, I'd argue. What's your time horizon? Are you looking 10 years, 20 years, tomorrow, 100 years? I really have no idea.
So our time horizons are really interesting. So the genesis of my organization and of the industry is the oil industry, which typically has 30, 40, 50-year payback periods on projects. So we're used to culturally thinking in very long terms. And there's a real risk with that, which is the next guy's problem, right? Push it out. So one of the things that the government has done, I think very successfully, is to have real clear milestones. And one of the things that industry has done very well is to have clear milestones. So what does that mean? You have a big end target. So like lots of countries, we have a net zero target date where we expect to get to effective net zero in terms of our CO2 emissions. That's 2050 for the UK, 2045 in Scotland, 2 different dates. That's a long way away. I won't be in this job in 2045, 2050. In between then and now, there are certain really big things that will make it happen. For example, we want to have, by that point, 180 million tons a year of CO2 being sequestered in the ground. But by 2030, we want there to be around 30 million tons being sequestered, which tells you you're on the right trajectory, you're on the right path. We're trying to drive down the emissions of oil and gas production at the same time. We expect that to halve by 2030. And so we've then got milestones that we've agreed with industry for 2025 and 2027. You have to have a realistic date for some of the massive structural changes we're talking about, because they will take decades. The risk with that is it gets kicked into the long grass and project management falls away. So you need some really crunchy short-term dates. What that allows us to do is to say, will the industry hit its 2025 targets? Yes. 2027 targets? Yes. So now the one I'm worried about is 2030. So it allows me to have staging posts where I've got real data for real intervention and real stewardship of those companies. But the reason why I'm doing it is a big enough economic prize and an environmental prize because it's the bigger number in 2050 and 2045.
And AI, everybody's talking about AI for everything. It's going to fix everything or ruin everything, one or the other. How does AI change your world?
AI and machine learning, I think, is something that the industry is getting really excited about. And we have a number of different bodies that are looking what to do with it. Some examples, if I take understanding where we could get the lowest emissions oil and gas from. The amount of data that the industry has built up, we have something in the order of 350, 400 terabytes of data stored in our national data repository that we've built. It's one of the world's largest single repositories of data. The ability to let, forgive my ignorance, AI bots crawl all over that and spot subsurface technical patterns that even the best geoscientists would miss is exciting. The opportunity to use AI at the other end of the life cycle of our industry around carbon storage and say you have 78 billion tons of storage space in the North Sea, 78 gigatons. To understand which are the best stores is quite hard. One part of them are depleted oil and gas reservoirs. We know loads about those because we've got all the data that was taken whilst they were producing. But the vast majority will be in saline aquifers, about which we know very little. But they may follow consistent patterns in terms of how things would perform in terms of the rocks and porosity and movement of gas. So AI's ability to do vast scale, and I mean vast scale of analysis at a speed that humans simply couldn't, is one of the reasons we can confidently think we'll accelerate the transition. So I'm very excited about its uses just in those two things. There are undoubtedly others, but I don't know what they are.
Are there things that really make you nervous about it?
As an organization, not that I'm aware of, as an individual, I think I worry about all the things that most people will worry about in terms of it's really important. Actually, it's a serious answer. I've mentioned to you in our conversation that we operate in a really sometimes difficult political environment, and I respect why, but it is difficult. Imagine in this interview if you could have me say things that would be demonstrably untrue, harmful to investment, frightening to society, and there would be no way of knowing that it was true or not. That worries me a lot, and I'm nobody, right? Now make me a very visible senior politician. That does worry me, and we have to all step up as a society to say we have to make sure that the information that we share with the public is sacrosanct and is respected. And if we can get that right through proper regulation, I'm a regulator, I like good regulation, then I think AI can be brilliant. But like anything that's brilliant, it needs safeguards. As you know, to quote the classic of Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. You can't have a tool as powerful as that without thinking about how do we make sure you manage the risks and downsides. That's a responsible government, responsible regulator.
So one of the things that we were talking about yesterday, actually, that was super interesting to me, was your explanation of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. And because here it's really quite politicized, but can you give us your perspective, being in the industry and being kind of a competitor of the US to that extent? So
for obvious reasons, I won't take any particular view on the politics of the legislation, but except that it is legislation in the US, it's been enacted and it's signed into law. The impact of the Inflation Reduction Act, according to significant investors in the space, so significant oil and gas companies, significant supply chain companies that manufacture and build things for the energy transition, is that it has moved capital to the US. Very simple terms, that the Inflation Reduction Act has attracted a significantly accelerated rate of capital into the US for things like carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, electric vehicles, solar and wind power. I think one of the things that we hear from industry is that both the scale of ambition, so I think around $360 billion worth of sort of tax creditable funding, but also the simplicity with which companies perceive it to be offered in terms of how can I access that, I think has been successful for the US. One of the things that I think is notable and is important in terms of an earlier question you asked me around how you have a narrative and engage with different audiences, is the US government's approach has been publicly to say, we'll give this money around and this investment support when you're putting US jobs in the US, when you're building real jobs in the US. And so you're talking to an audience that says, well, what is this thing? Is it a giveaway? Well, it's anchoring jobs in the US. Well, I like that. It's a good thing. If I'm a US citizen, I would like that. If you're then talking to an audience that wants to see the environmental damage of climate change arrested, it's doing that so you can talk to that audience. If you're an arch capitalist who isn't particularly concerned about climate change, this is a good investment proposition. And I'll be cautious just because of the nature of my job in terms I won't name them. But if you imagine some of the companies that I've heard talk about this, these are some of the most clear in terms of we will only invest where there's genuine strong return for stockholders. So this is not a charitable exercise. So it's been a powerful tool in terms of attracting capital to the US as a statement of fact, but they're not alone. So the UK has a significant number of programs in place. We've recently announced £20 billion worth of funding going into carbon capture and storage for 4 projects that are across the UK. And that will be our first, what we call track 1, our first round of projects. Likewise, we're looking at how you support the investment into hydrogen. And we already have, and we are lucky that we're probably 5 or 10 years ahead of the US, a vast investment cycle already in our offshore wind industry. And so I think it enables the US to really compete for capex in terms of capital jobs. And part of what the rest of us have to compete on, and we accept the challenge, is all of us want to not only deliver the transition, but to try to do so while anchoring the jobs, in my case, in the UK, high value manufacturing jobs, for example.
So listening to you, it always sounds like there's really a lot of hope. Emissions are going down. Almost everything you've described in terms of renewables seems to be getting a lot stronger. So what should we as consumers or humans be most concerned about when we think about our energy future?
If I look at just the UK, because I know the statistics, but they won't be wildly different, I think, in the US. Yesterday, 76% of the energy that people used in the UK came from oil and gas. So we have a long way to go to transition ourselves away from being dependent on oil and gas. And the direction of travel is clear. We need to transition away from oil and gas and that dependency. It doesn't mean you never use them, because there may be some things we can never find substitutes for. But that dependence, it's a massive, massive program. In the UK, we have probably 25 million households that use natural gas in boilers for heating, for cooking. What do we do about that? That's a real challenge the government is working actively on right now. The transformation of transport is one that people see as consumers. How do you get the cost of electric vehicles to a point where it's not just those on higher incomes that can afford them? And how do you do that before you make the internal combustion engine effectively illegal? How do you get that right so that you bring society? And so for me, I think one of the biggest challenges is how do we make sure that we make the transition relevant for everybody, because it should be relevant to everybody. How do you explain it in a way, as I said, that isn't condescending, isn't patronizing, but also that you make sure that it is affordable and attainable for everybody? And that's going to be really, really difficult. As consumers, it's demand-led. So we have to think about our own consumption, our own use, our own behaviors, and what we can do to contribute to lowering the demand and changing the demand. What are the alternatives that we can fund ourselves and we can use?
And you ultimately remain optimistic.
I remain massively optimistic. And I had the privilege of speaking to one of the international business classes this morning and used the example with them of, we are talking about climate change, the byproduct of something amazing. The byproduct is no longer acceptable and is problematic and has to be dealt with. But what it, in terms of the energy, the first kind of revolution of energy has caused, is life expectancy around the world has more than doubled since the 1770s. And prior to the 1770s, for centuries, it barely moved. It hovered in the 30s somewhere and is now in the high 60s globally. The biggest single change was the Industrial Revolution. The ability to move people, educate people, heat, power them, medicate them, support them, clothe them, and shelter them has transformed our planet for the better. The generation that's now looking at this topic get the chance to do that again. They get to say, well, we need to keep the good stuff. We don't want to lose penicillin. We don't want to lose operating theatres. I don't want to lose the ability to see the world if I want to, but I need to do that without this annoying byproduct. If you think about your students, if you think about the talent here at USC, you have people here that can change the world. And now we have a time for them to literally change the world. I don't know why you wouldn't be excited about that. And I think it's a fantastic time.
As always, I love the opportunity to sit down and talk to you. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming to campus again and again. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Good to talk to you. Thank you.
You just listened to another executive conversation. Today we were honored to learn from Stuart Payne. Stuart reminded us that sustaining leadership is paramount to business excellence, and this requires attention, resources, and commitment. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the Darla Moore School of Business at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.